Now I would like to invite and introduce Ms. Aditi Chandni and Mr. Varun Krishnan from SES, who will be sharing their experiences and learning takeaways from annual general meetings. So Ms. Aditi Chandni is designated as a senior manager and analyst. She is working with SES since 6 years. As far as her qualification is concerned, she is LLB, MBA, and qualified CFA level 1. Now, Mr. Varun Krishnan, he is holding a position of senior research analyst. He is working with SES since 5 years. As far as his qualification is concerned, he is CS, LLB, and MCOM. Now I hand over to Mr. Varun.
Okay. So we'll continue in the same slide. It is in continuation, or I can share also. Yeah, yeah. So good evening to all. Uh, First of all, at the outset, I'll just say I hope everyone is safe and healthy in during this COVID thing. And I and Aditi have shortlisted few cases which we will take everyone through this platform. And obviously, the 2020 AGM has been pretty challenging due to the COVID thing. Mr. Krishnamurthy has already explained about the steps taken by SEBI and MCA. So all AGMs were held virtually. So work from home and webinars have become the new normal. And despite this, what we have observed is 95 companies in the Nifty 50, they concluded their AGM by September, which is the original timeline. Some of them have lagged and they are also getting the AGMs done. Okay, so we covered somewhere around 750 companies during this AGM season and comprising of approximately 5,000 resolutions. Just to give a brief highlight, and 18% of resolutions we found concerns and we recommended against, while 81% were we recommended for. Interestingly, 30 resolutions were rejected by shareholders, and these were predominantly relating to appointment of directors. And when I see the data of rejection percentage, although 2018 and 2019 had fairly large number of resolutions, the rejection percentage was approximately even less than 0.5%. Now this rejection percentage has gone up now by approximately 23 basis points. So 30 resolutions have been rejected out of close to 5,000. And we at SES, we are of the opinion that the independent directors, the statutory auditors, and the audit committee, these three institutions form uh, the major pillars. They are the major pillars of governance. And our issues and my issue and Aditi's issue will revolve around these three. Firstly, this is a very interesting issue which we have observed in the recent while. So basically, IDs were not earlier required to give their resignation reasons and why they are resigning from a certain board. Now SEBI has come up with this regulation under SEBI LODR, wherein it has mandated that every ID who is resigning from a board must give reasons why he or she is resigning, and that reason must be sent to stock exchange. Now what has happened is we are of the opinion this is more of a compliance in letter than in spirit. So our observations are there are various IDs who have resigned citing health concerns, time commitment issues, preoccupation. Interestingly, these IDs have left a certain board and joined another board within a matter of days or weeks. And these involve big names, big IDs, and in fairly large corporates. So this is something which which is a matter of concern, that the IDs are not actually disclosing, either they are not disclosing what their actual reason is, or they are not following the law in spirit.
Sir?
Yes, hello. Okay. So another this.
Oh, just a second. Varun, please.
Okay. Okay. Another thing which is trending, and we have seen this, we have not seen this before. We have seen this issue in this 2020 only, And this is that there are various companies which are which have reduced or proposed to reduce the audit fee, and stating that they want to reduce the overall operating cost or over cost cutting and all sort of things, and they are actually targeting reduction in audit fees. So this is a very basic question: is audit fee a cost cutting measure, or is it, should it be done? Is it something like that where you cut the audit fee to avoid cost? Don't we buy insurance to secure our future? So do we see the cost in the insurance? Shouldn't audit fee be seen like that, like we do in insurance? So this is something very strange. To put an example, this is a company having market cap of 3,000 crores plus, which was paying an audit fee of 1.4 crores, and it said that we will reduce the audit fee to less than 50% because we are aiming to reduce our operating cost by 50%. So the auditor was left with no choice. He resigned. So this is how the state of affair is going on, and this also raises some questions over the commitment of the audit committee. Did the audit committee approve of reducing the audit fee? We don't know. There is again a question mark. Another thing is this related party transaction. So related party transactions may be a boon and a bane also. While these transactions help generating synergy benefits, at the same time these transactions have also resulted in siphoning of assets or resources from a public listed company to a promoter owned company as well. And why are these RPTs viewed susceptible is because of the undue advantage or undue influence, conflict of interest, which result in transfer of assets from a public company to a private party. Now the basic issue what we have here is not the related party per se. It is the kind of disclosure which company gives while proposing the resolution in front of shareholders. What we have actually observed is in 95% cases, companies fail to disclose why at first place they want to get into this related party transaction. There is absolutely no information based on which the shareholder can actually determine whether this related party transaction is good or bad. For example, I'll come to the inadequate disclosure first. So what happens is there are resolutions which say which seek approval for sale, purchase, goods and services, capital goods, fixed asset, leasing, renting, and almost everything under the sun. So this is how the resolution is structured, and there is no rationale. Approval, there has to be a time period for which a company seeking approval. There is no time period in that, and everything at the end of the day is there is a statement that this transaction is in ordinary course and at arm's length. So one wonders how is sale of fixed asset is in ordinary course. Again, as Mr. Gupta highlighted, this is probably another example of copy paste maybe, or I don't know if they are actually framing it or they've just taken it from earlier resolutions or something. So there was one example, and there are many examples, one of which I would like to highlight. So the RPT has a specific disclosure relating why the company is need for that transaction. Since the transaction involves a related party, so the company had stated what comparative advantage it is gaining by getting into transaction with a related party. We expect a time frame for that related party transaction. Is it 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? And that resolution also prescribed that what is the pricing benchmark and what will be the pricing formula based on which the pricing will be determined for that transaction. So these were a few cases. Next, I'll pass on this presentation to Aditi. Aditi will continue.
Yeah, Varun, will you change the slides when I request? Yeah, okay. So good evening, everybody. Continuing on what Varun has said, I'll be highlighting a few more types of resolutions in the past year that we have identified, certain types of resolutions. And what we believe as proxy advisors should have been the good governance practice in case of those resolutions. Whereas what we are actually witnessing when these resolutions are being proposed to shareholders. So one such type of resolution is resolution in which company is seeking approval for payment of remuneration to executive directors. Mostly we would see the problem areas would lie when the remuneration is proposed for approval for promoter executive directors. So as a proxy advisor, we have a set of guidelines that we look for, which would be basically a good governance scenario where, you know, disclosures such as the remuneration should be have a balance of fixed versus variable pay, and then the fixed and the variable pay both are at least capped. If not an absolute cap, at least there's a relative cap which is, say, linked to the PAT or linked to a specific figure like remuneration, and whatever sense that there is a cap on what amount can be given. Then so in some cases we would like to, what ideally should be is that if you are giving a bonus, the bonus might be deferred over a period of few years, and provisions such as clawback should be provided, you know, which should be part of the remuneration policy of the company. And finally, the objective criteria based on which you will be giving variable pay. Some of the key performance indicators, if not an exact idea about the benchmarks based on which you will be giving the variable pay, should be disclosed to the shareholders while seeking approval. And last but not the least, what ideally you would like to see is that the performance of the company and remuneration being proposed is going hand in hand. Now, what is actually happening in reality in the companies that are seeking approval? Many of them do not provide for any variable remuneration. SES has been highlighting this concern for almost 5-6 years now. We still witness companies coming with no variable remuneration at all. There is no cap on variable pay, and even if it is capped, the cap is that the variable pay will be equivalent to the total amount that is allowed under the Section 196 of Companies Act. We haven't found any company except maybe one or two. I think ICICI Bank and their entities like ICICI Lombard would be few of them which have been providing information regarding deferring of bonus. Other than that, we haven't found such kind of information in any resolution proposed. Clawback provision, I don't think we have witnessed in any policy as such. They might be part of the contract with the executive director. However, such provisions, if they are at all a part of the remuneration policy, are not disclosed. Similarly, what we have been witnessing is remuneration tends to be biased towards the promoters. Many companies where we'll evaluate will find that the non-executive promoter director vis-a-vis the promoter executive director, the pay, there's a very wide gap in pay, which is unjustified despite both the directors having similar kind of background, similar kind of experience. So, and then SES started questioning whether this happens only in heavily promoter driven companies, or where the stake of promoter is very high. But no, we witnessed the similar kind of remuneration practices even in professionally managed companies, where chairman who is a non-executive chairman tends to be remunerated far more than the executive director who's handling the day-to-day responsibilities of the company. Then disclosure on objective criteria, we haven't witnessed it in almost any resolution to date, maybe barring 1 or 2 exceptions. But objective criteria which provides with what would be the key performance indicator are not indicated in remuneration policy or in the proposed resolution. And most of the times, everything is left to the discretion of the board or NRC, which means even when they are capped, they will say that NRC or the board has the option to modify or vary the remuneration proposed. Even more shockingly, we see that some of the companies where profit has been in a downfall for last decade or so, and the promoters, the remuneration for promoters has been increasing. In fact, they come for approval to pay in excess of the allowed amount under the Companies Act for more than 10% of the net profit. So then, as proxy advisors, we start asking a question that if seeking approval is what is allowed under the law, then approval has no real meaning at all, because you are seeking approval for something that you are already allowed to do. So why would you come to a shareholder to seek their approval? Next slide. Varun, can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. So some of the areas where we have identified some major governance concerns in the previous year, which we witnessed some of the resolutions. So one such resolution is where the company has disclosed in its in the stock exchange announcement regarding the COVID disclosure that company had to, like the employees of the company had to endure a pay cut. Surprisingly, when the AGM notice is announced, there's a resolution to seek approval to pay MD remuneration which is in excess of the net profits of the company. Not only that, they are also seeking for an 8% increase in the proposed salary of MD. Then we have seen cases where 98% of the board remuneration is being taken up by 1 or 2 executive promoter directors. Vis-a-vis, we have, and this has been a constant case. This has been seen over years and years. And the IDs of the company are, if paid any kind of bonus, which they are not, are paid very minimal bonus compared to what the executive promoter directors are taking from the company. Then remuneration, we have seen since cases where boards have more than 4 or 5 executive directors also, all belonging to the same family, all related relatives of each other, and all of them getting exactly same remuneration. And not just their fixed pay is exactly the same, their variable pay is also the same. So as proxy advisors, we start questioning that how is it that on an executive director level, 2 individuals are performing exactly in the same manner, so that you have evaluated the performances and given them the exactly same bonus. So this looks more like a case of a pre-decided amount that has to go to the promoters, and then pre-decided percentage that has to be equally split between all of them. And in some cases, we have seen dismissal performance of the company, whereas the promoters being remunerated higher and higher each year. Now, moving on to another type of resolutions where we have found a lot of governance concerns are when there's investment in subsidiaries or associate or JVs, guarantees given or loans given to these associates and JVs. So ideally, as per Companies Act, there's a certain threshold up to which you can provide loans without seeking shareholder approval. Beyond that certain percentage, you have beyond that particular amount, you have to seek approval of shareholders. Now, kind of apathy that we have noticed in the resolutions proposed. Omnibus resolutions are being proposed. Company is seeking approval to provide X amount of anything that can be in form of loans, it can be in form of guarantee, it can be form of investment, and to any of these, it can be to a subsidiary, to a JV, to associate, or to any other or unrelated entity as well. Identities of such related parties are not disclosed to who the company wants to provide a loan to. We have seen cases where companies' own asset size is around 2,800 crores and they are seeking to provide loans of up to 3,000 crores to an unrelated entity. Then we have seen another case recently where a company bids and invests up to 800 crore in another company whose health is deteriorating and it's up for a sort of stake in the market. But while investing this 800 crores, there was no they did not seek approval of the shareholders. Whereas now, once the investment is done, the company comes to the shareholders to provide approval for giving guarantee of 1,400 crores. And now, since the limit is breached, the resolution has been approached to the shareholders. We have also seen cases where you are saying that the company is saying that they want to provide loans and guarantee to another subsidiary company or a JV or associate, but there's never a mention about what is the contribution of another party. Whoever is other shareholders of that associate or JV, what is their contribution? So all of these cases as proxy advisors make us question on 3 things. If you are a shareholder, can you really take informed decision when it comes to such omnibus resolution where identities of the parties to whom you are giving these loans or guarantees not being provided? Will the company or the company's board or the audit committee approve these omnibus resolution without having information on who these loans are going to be given to or who these guarantees are going to be given to? What is the purpose? Similarly, will the audit committee and the board of directors approve a blanket resolution Is that what is the intention of the law? When the law says that seek approval of the shareholders, does it mean that seek approval of the shareholders to do anything under the sun with respect to this loans and guarantee? Similarly, is being economical with the truth, wherein you have already invested 800 crores and that investment is now at stake unless you give a 14 crore guarantee. And this is when you come to the shareholders. So you eventually broke the resolution in two parts, decided to invest 800 crores, and now the shareholders are in a soup where they can't actually do anything but to give you an approval. So are these the kind of resolutions that we are going to propose to shareholders? Moving next. Now, another area where we have found, which we have been raising a concern for last 7-8 years, I think, since SES began, valuation report, is it a foe or a threat? Now, what is the objective of valuation report? Ideally, the simple objective of valuation report is to give you the value of the entities so that you are able to see for yourself as a shareholder. You are able to take an informed decision in the matter of any kind of scheme of arrangement or amalgamation or merger, so that you basically know what, ideally the two entities that are involved in this transaction, what is the valuation, and then you can decide that it is fair or not. And ideally the valuers are supposed to do this independently. Is it being met? So as SES, we don't think this objective is being met at all. We have seen valuation report, fairness opinion, audit committee approval, in fact the board approval of the scheme all on the same day. So this appears to be like a perfect case of monotony amongst the four of these entities, where everything is pre-decided and at the end of the day the documents are just signed on that one particular day. What SES questions is, in the first place, that should valuation report give any share exchange ratio? Should they decide what should be the mix of debt, equity or cash? What the job of the valuer is to provide the valuation of that entity and give a basis on how they have arrived at that valuation. Why should valuer be giving a share exchange ratio? Now, this concern we have been raising over the last 7 or 8 years. We have been constantly saying that the valuation report are not meaningful at all. Now, one out of these 100 companies, sometime we find a very good valuation report, which gives us a little bit idea, or at least makes us a little bit informed to take a more a decision which is more thought of. So one such company we found was REIT, where we found that the valuation report actually disclosed enough information on the workings of that valuation. Next. Now, two of the cases where we identified where valuation report becomes a problem by itself is the valuation exercise. Is it a chicken and an egg story? And one place the company has said that the consideration of X crores has been arrived on basis of the valuation report. In the valuation report, the valuers have disclosed that they have been informed by the board that to carry out the transaction at X crores. Now, in this case, as proxy advisors, the question that comes to us is who has calculated the value, whether it was the management or the valuers. In this case, you will not find an answer, and so the whole exercise of valuation, or this whole valuation report, becomes a rubber stamp report where shareholders' money is wasted, and it gives no information to the shareholders to actually take any informed decision. Similarly, valuation reports are alike as two P's. Now, a company is merging, there are 3 or 2 different valuers giving valuation report. But surprisingly, the valuation valuers both come and arrive at the same exact share exchange ratio, which is also okay, but the disclaimer of the valuation report by itself says that valuation is not an art, not a science, but an art. So like SES would question, like how are there 2 identical art pieces? One has to be a copy or a fake. So with all of this, we would like to conclude basically that we have come a long way since 2012 when law first implemented e-voting, and we took a leap in governance. That whole implementation of e-voting was a big leap in governance, giving voice to the shareholders. But governance by itself will always be a work in process. Regulators, proxy advisors, and all the watchdogs of governance will always need to be on high alert. But the only real reform will start coming when the stakeholders start asking questions to companies. When they start seeking better disclosures, then will come the real reform. Because as long as we are relying on regulators or proxy advisors, or regulators more so, laws can only instill fear. And even when we have seen laws being made, in India, we have mostly principle-based laws. So the compliance is out of fear. The compliance is only to the word of the law, not in the spirit of the law. So by law, you cannot change the character. Real governance will only be witnessed when the character becomes exemplary. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Shubhangi.
Thank you, Aditi and Varun, for sharing your observations.